Nigeria just made a decision that is essentially shaking the entire Cameroonian political landscape right now. Abuja have flat out refused an extradition request involving Cameroon's main opposition figure. We are talking about Issa Tchiroma Bakary here, the man who actually declared himself the winner of the highly disputed Cameroon's October election. That was before he fled the country. Now, in today's program, we are going to unpack why Nigeria refused, how Tchiroma ended up under the watch of Nigerian security operatives, and why this refusal has triggered what diplomats are now calling a serious diplomatic crisis between the two neighboring countries who really can't afford this right now. Here's what we do know at this point. Since Cameroon's October 12th election, the country has experienced widespread protests, massive security force deployment, and we have got a lot of documented killings. Opposition supporters are claiming the vote was rigged. Human rights organizations are reporting mass arrest and excessive use of force by Cameroon security operatives. And in all of this chaos, Tchiroma disappeared from Garoua and basically reappeared across the border in northern Nigeria. Now, Cameroon wants him back. They have made formal requests, but Nigeria is refusing to extradite him. The reason here are layered, and it is also a simple reason, because there is no extradition treaty between Nigeria and Cameroon. The charges Tchiroma faces are clearly political in nature, and there is real concern about his safety if he gets returned back to Cameroon. Now, the situation is escalating pretty dramatically. Cameroonian officials are accusing Nigeria of interference in their internal affairs. Pan-African activists are praising this move as a stand for democratic principles. Nigerian citizens are debating why their country is now central to Cameroon's post-election crisis. This episode examines the verified facts we have, the legal framework at play here, and the geopolitical stakes behind this unfolding cross-border standoff. Let's get into it. So we are looking at November 2nd, 2025. According to multiple reports we have been able to verify, Nigerian security forces conducted an operation in Adamawa State based on intelligence they got from Cameroonian authorities. The target was Issa Tchiroma Bakary, who Cameroon was describing as a fugitive who have illegally crossed the border. Now, Cameroon intelligence reports and other sources are indicating that a Cameroonian team was actually positioned in Nigeria, basically prepared to transport him back to Cameroon immediately. Now, this wasn't unprecedented, and this is important context here, because in 2018, Nigeria had extradited 47 Anglophone Cameroonian separatist leaders to Yaoundé in what became known as the Nera operation. A Nigerian court later ruled that extradition illegal in 2019. It established this pattern of cooperation on security matters between these two countries. But on November 2nd, the operation didn't proceed the way Cameroon expected it to. When Nigerian authorities conducting this raid identified the individual as Issa Tchiroma Bakary and realized we are not talking about some criminal fugitive here, but Cameroon's main opposition presidential candidate, the entire situation changed almost immediately. Now, according to Nigerian security sources who have been speaking anonymously to other media outlets, consultations were made with higher authorities. The decision came back pretty clear. Tchiroma will not be extradited. Instead, they placed him under Nigerian protective custody. The Cameroonian team was basically informed their operation in Nigeria would not proceed. Tchiroma is currently remaining in Nigeria. Now, this represents a really significant shift here. Nigeria, we're talking about West Africa's most populous nation, a leading ECOWAS member, and Cameroon's partner in the multinational joint task force that is fighting Boko Haram, had just refused to hand over Biya's main political challenger. Now, to understand why this decision carries such weight, we need to look at what happened in the weeks leading up to this moment. We need to go back to October 12, 2025, back to an election whose results remain deeply contested. Now, before I talk about the October 12, 2025 presidential election in Cameroon, let me talk about why Cameroon is launching this manhunt for Issa Tchiroma Bakary that is currently having what I would call an asylum or protective custody by the Nigerian government. That is Cameroonian government. They are accusing him of being responsible for the unrest that escalated shortly after the election. The unrest that resulted into the killing of youth in Cameroon that are protesting against Biya. Now, the Biya government is blaming Issa Tchiroma for this escalation. They are blaming him for urging the youth to protest. This is what Biya's government is saying. Now, back to the October 12th election. Cameroon held its presidential election. Biya, 92 years old and empowered since 1982. He was seeking an 8th consecutive term. Now, his main challenger, Issa Tchiroma Bakary, who is actually a former government minister and who resigned back in June to run for president. The election is taking place amid significant controversy here because in July, the Electoral Commission barred Maurice Kamto, the guy who finished second back in 2018 and has been this persistent critic of the Biya government. They barred him completely from running. So that is why we no longer hear about him. That is why we probably don't talk about him as much as we talk about Bakary. If he wasn't barred from running, he's probably the guy that we'll be talking about right now. Now, after the election, Human Rights Watch documented his exclusion as part of a pattern of restricting opposition participation. We saw it in Ivory Coast and we saw it in Tanzania. Cameroon is just part of the process, the kind of democracy we are seeing in Africa. So on election day itself, the Catholic Church observers are documenting irregularities, including deceased individuals still on voter rolls, unequal distribution of ballots, and intimidation in some areas. However, voting proceeds mostly without major violence, or at least not yet. Now, here is where it gets interesting because on October 14, before any official results are announced, Tchiroma holds this press conference. He declares victory, claiming his coalition's observers documented results from polling stations showing he won decisively. He is citing figures showing he received over 60% in some areas with a national total of at least 54.8%. He is displaying tally sheet his team collected. The government immediately warned that only the Constitutional Council has authority to announce results. They are saying Tchiroma violated electoral law by declaring victory prematurely. October 20th, the National Vote Counting Commission released provisional results. Biya gets 53%, Tchiroma gets 35%. Then, October 27th, the Constitutional Council officially declares Biya the winner with about 53.6% versus Tchiroma's 35.1%. Tchiroma and his coalition, they are rejecting these results completely. They are maintaining the official count doesn't reflect what observers documented at polling stations. Crisis Group, in their October 29 analysis, they noted that tally sheet posted from polling stations by civil society groups and opposition parties appeared to show Tchiroma prevailing by, and I'm quoting here, a convincing margin. The Episcopal Conference of Cameroon, these are Catholic bishops who deployed election observers. They documented multiple irregularities but stopped short of declaring the election fraudulent. So, we have got two narratives existing here. The official results showing a Biya victory and opposition documentation suggesting a Tchiroma win. This dispute set the stage for what comes next. When Cameroonians take to the street demanding answers about the vote count, the government response isn't dialogue, it's a security crackdown. So on October 21st, 2025, the violence started with a teacher who got shot and killed during a protest in Garoua. She was the first confirmed fatality in these post-election demonstrations. Then October 26 and 27, protests are erupting across multiple cities. We saw a lot of protests in Douala, Garoua, Maroua, and even in Yaoundé. Security forces deployed in strength. They are using tear gas, and according to multiple witness accounts and human rights documentation, live ammunition against crowds were used. Now, the death toll became this point of contention. UN sources are saying 48 civilians were killed in post-election period. Opposition group claim 55 deaths. The Cameroonian government, in a statement on October 12, they acknowledged 16 deaths. Human rights organizations are saying the government figures significantly undercount the actual death toll. Now, according to Human Rights Watch, in their November 10 report, they documented at least 312 people detained between October 26th and November 10th. Out of these, 154 hasn't been presented before a judge at the time of the report. Many are facing charges including hostility against the homeland, revolution, rebellion, and insurrection, and these are offenses that can carry the death penalty under Cameroonian law. The report is documenting cases including, and now get this, a 63-year-old civil engineer arrested and beaten for sending a WhatsApp message to family members encouraging them to vote for Tchiroma. Students were detained for social media posts supporting the opposition. Entire neighborhoods in Yola experienced lockdowns and house-to-house searches. Now, on October 27th evening, according to Cameroon intelligence report, snipers were positioned on buildings near Tchiroma's residence in Garoua. 2 of his supporters were killed outside the compound gate. Interior Minister Paul Atanga Nji announced on state television that Tchiroma will be prosecuted for inciting this violence and organizing illegal demonstrations. October 28, security forces surrounded Tchiroma's residence in Garoua. The order, according to multiple sources, was to arrest him that night. But when security forces entered the compound early on October 29, Tchiroma wasn't there. He has already left before the raid. How he escaped and who helped him. This involves claims that reveal potential fractures within Cameroon's security establishment. So we are looking at the night of October 28 to 29, 2025. The timeline here is gotten from different reports, social media posts, and news accounts we have been able to piece together. Tchiroma disappears from his Garoua residence sometime between late evening on October 28 or early morning of October 29. When security forces raid the compound at dawn on October 29th, he was already gone. Then on 31st, Tchiroma posts this statement on his campaign Facebook page. The post is being widely shared and reported even across the mainstream media. The post includes this really key line: "I thank the loyalist army, which has shown its patriotism by escorting me to a safe location and is currently ensuring my protection." Now, this claim that soldiers actually helped him escape hasn't been independently verified by government sources or neutral observers, but it raises significant questions here. If it is accurate, it suggests fractures within Cameroon's military, with some personnel choosing to protect the opposition candidate rather than arrest him. According to multiple sources, Cameroon intelligence reports and other outlets are reporting Tchiroma crossed into Nigeria near Yola in Adamawa State. Some accounts describe a crossing on foot. Others mention civilian vehicles. The exact method remains unclear, but multiple sources confirmed he entered Nigerian territory by October 29. Now, Nigerian authorities initially appear to have been unaware of his presence, or should I say, his identity. But within days, Nigerian security forces locate him in Yola. It's a state in northern Nigeria. Now, this is where Cameroon's government moves quickly. They contact their Nigerian counterpart, describing Tchiroma as a dangerous fugitive facing criminal charges. They are requesting his immediate return. And according to Cameroon intelligence report and Nigerian media sources, including Daily Trust and State Press, Cameroon sends a special operations team to Nigeria. And the apparent goal here is to bring Tchiroma back before Nigeria fully processes who he is and what his situation actually represents. Then on November 2nd, the operation reaches its critical moment, but it doesn't go as Cameroon planned. Because when Nigerian authorities realize they are holding not some criminal fugitive, but a presidential candidate claiming he won an election, the entire calculation changes dramatically. So on November 2nd, 2025, Nigerian security forces acted on information from Cameroon, locate and detain Tchiroma in Yola, Adamawa State. Cameroonian authorities have been describing him as this dangerous criminal who fled to avoid prosecution. A Cameroonian special squad is reportedly in Nigeria, basically ready to transport him back to Cameroon. But when Nigerian authorities conducting the operation confirmed the individual's identity, we are talking about Issa Tchiroma Bakary here, a presidential candidate, the man who declared himself the winner on October 14 before being threatened with arrest. the entire situation gets reassessed. According to anonymous Nigerian security sources quoted in multiple media outlets, including Daily Trust, State Press Nigeria, and international coverage, consultations take place with senior officials in Abuja. This likely involves the Ministry of Interior and possibly the Office of the President. The decision gets made. Nigeria will not extradite Tchiroma. He is placed under protective custody. Now the Cameroonian team is informed. The planned rendition doesn't proceed. Tchiroma remains in Nigeria, though his exact location, whether he's in Yola or he has been moved to Abuja, that varies depending on the source. So why did Nigeria refuse? The legal framework here is pretty clear. Nigeria and Cameroon have no formal bilateral extradition treaty. This is according to legal experts quoted by multiple media outlets. The Nigerian Bar Association even confirmed this in statements to the media. Nigeria is bound by its National Commission for Refugees Act of 1989, which prohibits returning refugees or asylum seekers to territories where their life or freedom will be threatened. Nigeria also ratified the 1951 UN Convention on Refugees, the 1967 Protocol, and the 1969 OAU Convention on Refugee Issues. The principle of non-refoulement, that is, the prohibition against returning someone to face persecution or execution, is a cornerstone of international refugee law, and Tchiroma faces charges of insurrection in Cameroon, which carries the death penalty. There is also precedent here because in 2018, Nigeria extradited 47 Anglophone Cameroonian separatists to Yaoundé. But in 2019, a Nigerian court ruled that extradition was illegal. The ruling said it violated Nigerian law and international obligations. Beyond the legal framework, there are also political calculations at play. Nigerian officials speaking anonymously indicated to media that Nigeria didn't want to be complicit in what appeared to be political persecution following a disputed election, with international organizations including the UN expressing concern about excessive force and arbitrary detentions back in Cameroon. Extraditing an opposition leader facing potential execution would contradict Nigeria's stated commitment to democratic principles. So when Cameroon learned Nigeria's refusal, the reaction was immediate. This wasn't merely disappointment, it was shock and anger, because Nigeria had just done something pretty unusual in African regional diplomacy. It chose legal principles and democratic considerations over bilateral convenience and, for lack of a better word, regional stability calculations. Nigeria's refusal to extradite Tchiroma, it has generated immediate reactions across three levels: within Cameroon, within Nigeria, and across the continent. In Cameroon, Interior Minister Paul Atanga Nji, in statement reported by multiple Cameroonian media outlets, he threatened that Tchiroma will face consequences and described him as having abandoned his responsibilities. State-controlled media outlets are branding Nigeria's action as harboring a terrorist and interfering in Cameroon's internal affairs. But Cameroonian opposition supporters and youth activists, they are responding differently, because when you go across the social media, they are thanking Nigeria for protecting democratic principles. Tchiroma's continued safety in Nigeria appears to be embodying continued resistance at home. The lockdown protests called by Tchiroma from November 3rd to 7th, they see significant compliance in opposition strongholds, including Garoua, Douala, and Maroua. In Nigeria, reactions are mixed and often track regional and demographic lines. In northern Nigeria, particularly in Adamawa State, where Tchiroma is being held, and in neighboring Borno and Taraba, there is substantial support for protecting him. Many see him as a fellow northerner and Muslim fleeing persecution. Nigeria already hosts more than 70,000 Cameroonian refugees, predominantly Anglophone civilians fleeing the separatist conflict. In southern Nigeria and among some political analysts, questions are arising about whether Nigeria should involve itself in a neighboring country's internal political dispute. Security analysts are expressing concern about potential damage to Nigeria-Cameroon cooperation in the multinational Joint Task Force, which is essential for combating Boko Haram and Islamic State West African province in the Lake Chad region. Nigerian legal experts in commentary for various media outlets, They are debating whether Nigeria violated diplomatic norms or held its legal obligations. The consensus among international law specialists is that Nigeria acted within its rights given the absence of an extradition treaty and the political nature of charges Tchiroma was actually facing. Now, at the continental and international level, responses reveal familiar patterns. The African Union, in an October 27 statement, congratulated Biya on his electoral victory while simultaneously expressing grave concern about post-election violence and calling for inclusive dialogue. This contradiction, legitimizing the incumbent while deploring the consequences, is typical of AU responses to disputed elections all across Africa. France, the former colonial power that maintains significant influence in Cameroon, issued a statement on October 29 expressing concern about violence and calling for restraint. However, France didn't challenge the election results or condemn the security crackdown in strong terms, much like the way they condemned or reacted to what happened in Tanzania. So, for Cameroon, they are treating it with kid's glove. The European Union issued similar generic statement calling for dialogue and respect for human rights. The United Nations Secretary General, in an October 27 statement, they expressed deep concern about post-election violence and reports of excessive force. They called for thorough investigation and urged inclusive dialogue. But the UN also didn't challenge the official election results. Pan-African activists and commentators, particularly on social media, they are framing Nigeria's action as this rare example of an African state standing with democratic principles rather than with an entrenched government. Others are warning that Nigeria is setting a precedent that could destabilize regional relations. The fundamental question emerging from these reactions is geopolitical. Does Nigeria's refusal represent a new model of African states holding each other accountable for democratic violations, or is it an exceptional case that is unlikely to be repeated? Now, as of November 17, 2025, the situation remains unresolved. Tchiroma Bakary is still in Nigeria under the watch of Nigerian security forces. Biya sits in Yaoundé, having been sworn in for his 8th term on November 6th. Cameroon continues to demand return, but Nigeria continues to refuse. No clear resolution is in sight here, but we can identify several possible scenarios based on regional precedents and current dynamics. The most likely scenario is prolonged standoff. Tchiroma remains in Nigeria, potentially for months or years, attempting to mobilize opposition from exile. Cameroon maintains diplomatic pressure and possibly attempts covert operation to abduct him. Nigeria has done this kind of illegal adoption before. Remember Nnamdi Kanu, how they adopted him from Kenya. It is actually funny that Nigeria, which have betrayed and broken all the international law that restrict them from doing the exact same thing in Kenya, they are now standing their ground on this particular matter. It is worth acknowledging. Now, the situation here produces this low-intensity crisis. We are looking at sporadic protests in Cameroon, continued detention of opposition activists, economic disruption from instability, and increased refugee flows to Nigeria and other neighbors. Nigeria-Cameroon bilateral relations remain strained but didn't collapse entirely because both countries need to maintain security cooperation against Boko Haram. Historical parallels include Côte d'Ivoire's extended post-election crisis from 2010 to 2011 and South Africa's ongoing role hosting Zimbabwean opposition figures. A second scenario involves Nigeria granting formal asylum. This would involve legal processing of Tchiroma's refugee claim and official recognition of his status. Such a move will likely trigger Cameroon to recall its ambassador from Nigeria and escalate through regional organizations and the African Union. Nigeria will be positioned as this regional guarantor of democratic principles, but at significant cost to bilateral relations. Tchiroma will become a recognized government-in-exile figure, potentially sustaining opposition mobilization over an extended period. A third scenario, though less likely given current positions, it involves negotiated compromise. Nigeria could offer to broker talks between Biya and Tchiroma, possibly resulting in a power-sharing arrangement where Tchiroma returns as prime minister or in another capacity, combined with constitutional reforms and new legislative elections. This requires both principals to compromise significantly on entrenched positions. Historical parallels also include Kenya's 2008 agreement between Kibaki and Odinga, the Zimbabwe's 2009 power-sharing deal between Mugabe and Tsvangirai. However, both examples show such arrangements are fragile and often fail to address underlying grievances. A fourth scenario, less probable but not impossible, I might add, it involves military intervention in Cameroon. If Tchiroma's claim about loyalist soldiers helping him escape is accurate, it suggests fractures within the Cameroonian military. A coup by military factions citing the stolen election and inviting Tchiroma back as civilian president, it will follow the same pattern we saw in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. However, Cameroon's military has historically been more stable and loyal to Biya than the Sahel militaries were to their deposed civilian president. A fifth scenario sees for Biya consolidating power and Tchiroma gradually fading from relevance. The security crackdown succeeded in demobilizing opposition. Tchiroma, isolated in exile without the daily connection to events in Cameroon, he loses his political base. He becomes a footnote in Cameroonian politics. Biya completes his 8th term if God allows, and succession struggles resume focus on other figures. Now let me step back a bit and examine continental implications here. This crisis is testing whether a new norm is emerging in African politics. Will other African states follow Nigeria's example and shelter opposition leaders fleeing disputed elections, or is this an exception based on unique circumstances? Nigeria's size and regional influence, the lack of an extradition treaty, and the credibility of electoral fraud claims, the documented violence against protesters, there is a broader generational pattern worth noting here. Because across Africa in recent years, from Senegal's 2024 election, where youth mobilization helped defeat the establishment candidate, to the Sahel coups, where populations tired of aging leaders supported military takeovers, to Kenya's 2024 Gen Z protests, younger Africans are increasingly rejecting gerontocracy and demanding accountability. The situation as it stands: Biya is 92 years old and in power for 43 years. Governs from Yaoundé, insisting that order must be maintained. Issa Tchiroma Bakary, about 700 kilometers northeast in Nigeria, maintains he is Cameroon's legitimate president-elect. Between them lies this diplomatic crisis, a regional standoff, and a test of principles. Can African states build systems where disputed elections have diplomatic consequences, where opposition leaders fleeing persecution find refuge regionally rather than in Western capitals, where African nations hold each other accountable for democratic violations based on continental norms rather than external pressure? Nigeria's decision represents a test case here. It may signal a new approach to asylum and democratic accountability between African countries, or it may prove exceptional, dependent on specific circumstances, unlikely to repeat elsewhere. Now, this is what is certain for sure. As of November 17, about 312 Cameroonians remain in detention for demanding electoral accountability, according to Human Rights Watch. Families are mourning loved ones killed in protest. 30 million Cameroonians are watching to see whether this challenge to a long-standing, long-entrenched president will produce change or be suppressed like previous challenges. The rest of Africa is also watching. How this crisis resolve will indicate whether power on the continent increasingly derives from ballot and popular legitimacy, or whether it will continue to flow from longevity in office and control of security forces. The standoff continues. Neither side is blinking. The outcome remains uncertain. Now, so what do you think will happen here? Should Nigeria formalize Tchiroma's asylum status, or should Cameroon's sovereignty concern prevail? Share your perspective in the comment section. And I must say, I don't know if I should say I am impressed with how Nigeria is handling this, or should I say I am genuinely surprised, because the normal Nigeria or African politics that I know, they will quickly hand over the opposition back to the ruling government, in this case Biya. But Nigeria have decided to stick to the law. Nigeria has decided to stick to international law and all the UN or African Union conventions to ensure Issa Tchiroma's safety, because should he return to Cameroon, nobody can tell what Paul Biya might do to him. Remember, Maurice Kamto spent months in prison during the 2018 disputed election. Maybe that is what Paul Biya is planning here. So remaining in Nigeria, it will protect Tchiroma from being arrested or imprisoned while operating from Nigeria and mobilizing support at home. These are delicate times. And Cameroonians, you guys are the ones that have the final say in all of this. Now, if you want to continue to see my content talking about issues that matters, important issues, maybe consider to subscribe and turn on those notifications. I am still your host, Ezekiel Enejeta, and I will see you in the next one. It's a bye-bye for now.